After my daughter blindsided me with a wheelchair ramp I never asked for and a bill for back rent I never agreed to, who won? I stayed quiet through my first knee surgery recovery until I found the folder she thought I'd never see, and understood exactly why she'd been so eager to bring me home. I'm so grateful you're spending this time with me. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, son or daughter, which one are you? I'd love to know who's listening tonight. Welcome back. A quick note before we start. This story blends real emotional truth with fictional details for the sake of the telling. Names and places are invented, but the lesson underneath is real. There's a particular kind of cold that comes off a hospital hallway floor at 6 in the morning, the kind that climbs up through your socks no matter how good the heating is. I remember that cold better than I remember most of what the surgeon told me. It was late September, and the sky over Tulsa had that hard, bright blue you only get once the humidity finally breaks. I'd been coming to St. Francis for checkups since my knees started going, first the right one, then the left. 40 years of climbing scaffolding for a living catching up with me all at once. Dr. Whitfield was young for a surgeon, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who looked you straight in the face when he delivered bad news instead of studying his clipboard. He told me the left knee needed a full replacement, and recovery would run 8 to 10 weeks minimum, most of it needing help just getting up out of a chair. "Do you have someone who can be with you, Mr. Kessler?" he asked. "The first 2 weeks especially. You shouldn't be climbing stairs alone, and you'll need help with basic things. Bathing. Meals." I told him I had a daughter 40 minutes away in Broken Arrow. He nodded like that settled it. I sat in my truck in that parking lot a long while before I turned the key, watching people come and go through the hospital doors the way you do when you're trying to put off the next hard thing. My wife, Diane, had been gone 6 years by then. Cancer, the fast kind. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral. After she passed, I stayed in the house we'd raised our daughter in, a modest 3-bedroom on Larkwood Avenue, because Diane's hydrangeas were still blooming along the side fence, and I couldn't bring myself to leave them behind for someone else to forget to water. My daughter's name is Renee. She's 39, married to a man named Curtis who sells commercial insurance, and they've got a house out past the Broken Arrow line that Curtis is always talking about refinancing. I raised Renee alone from the time she was 13 most days, since Diane worked nights at the hospital laundry to help make ends meet on a construction foreman's wage. I coached her softball team for 4 years even though I didn't know a thing about softball when I started. When she and Curtis needed help with the down payment on their first house, I handed over $18,000 I'd saved doing side jobs on weekends for 6 years straight. I never once asked for a dime of it back. That wasn't why I did it. I called her from that parking lot. She picked up on the third ring, sounding like she was in the middle of folding laundry or scrolling her phone, one of those half-there voices. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I told her about the knee, the surgery, the recovery timeline. I told her I'd need somewhere to stay those first couple weeks, someone who could help me get around. There was a pause on the line, longer than I expected, maybe 3 full seconds. "Yeah," she said finally. "Yeah, of course, Dad. Come stay with us. We'll figure it out." 5 words. We'll figure it out. I pressed my free hand flat against the steering wheel and felt something in my chest come loose that had been wound tight since I sat down in that exam room. My eyes stung, the way they do when you've been holding yourself together too long and somebody finally hands you permission to stop. "Thank you," I told her. "Thank you, sweetheart." We settled the details over the next 2 weeks while I got my affairs in order at the house. Renee said Curtis was fine with it. Said it the way you mentioned something that was never really a question in the first place. I told myself that was a good sign, that it meant they'd been ready without needing to think it over. I didn't stop to ask myself why a man needed exactly 0 seconds to agree to house his sick father-in-law for 2 months. I should have. But when you're 66 years old and staring down a surgery that scares you more than you'll admit to anyone, and your daughter says, "Come stay with us," you don't sit there parsing her tone. You just feel grateful. I packed light. A duffel bag of clothes, my medication list, and the framed photograph of Diane I kept on my nightstand, the one from our trip to the Grand Canyon in 1994, where she's got her hand shading her eyes from the sun, and she's laughing at something just out of frame. I told myself it would be 2 months, home by Thanksgiving at the latest. What I didn't understand yet, sitting in that parking lot with my heart quietly grateful, was that Renee hadn't said yes because she was worried about her father. She'd said yes because there was a number in her head, and I was going to help her get to it. The surgery went fine. Or, as fine as these things go. I woke up groggy, my leg wrapped and throbbing in a way I hadn't fully braced myself for, and 2 days later a hospital transport van dropped me at Renee and Curtis's front door with a walker, a bag of pain medication, and a folder of physical therapy instructions I could barely focus on reading. Curtis answered the door. Same easy smile he'd always had, same firm handshake, but he didn't hug me, and I noticed it the way you notice a missing stair step, a small absence that throws your balance off just slightly. "Good to see you, Walt," he said, which struck me as strange since my name is Harold, but I let it go. Maybe he'd just misspoken. Renee came out from the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel, 39 years old, blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing workout clothes even though I never once saw her go for a run the whole time I stayed there. She looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture delivered a size too big for the room, starting at my face, dropping to the walker, then to the bag of medications in my lap. "Hey, Dad," she said, and there was a smile there, but it stopped well short of her eyes. "Welcome. We're so glad you're here." Thank you for having me," I said. "I know it's an imposition." "Of course not," she said, too quickly. Then, almost as an afterthought, tilting her head just slightly the way her mother used to when she was deciding how to phrase something difficult, "I do hope this doesn't turn into more than a couple months. We've got a lot going on right now." The words landed soft, not cruel in tone, more like she was reminding a delivery driver about a parking restriction. I felt something go out of the room, or maybe out of me. "Doctor, Whitfield said 8 to 10 weeks for full recovery," I said carefully, "but I'll be as little trouble as I can manage." "Well, we'll see how it goes," she said, and the smile stayed exactly the same. Curtis cleared his throat and said he'd show me to my room. I followed him and the walker down a hallway past what was clearly a finished guest bedroom, a made bed, morning light through real curtains, and my chest lifted just slightly, foolishly. Then he kept walking, past that room, to a door at the end of the hall right beside the garage entrance. He pushed it open. It was a converted mudroom. That's the only honest word for it. A daybed frame wedged against the wall between a stacked washer and dryer and a shelf of paint cans. No window to speak of, just a narrow slat of frosted glass up near the ceiling. A single overhead light on a pull chain that buzzed faintly when it came on. The air held that chemical tang of laundry detergent and old paint, and the concrete floor under the thin carpet remnant made the whole room noticeably colder than the rest of the house. "Guest room's kind of Renee's project space right now," Curtis said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sewing stuff, mostly. This was the best we could do on short notice." I stood in that doorway, a long moment, with my walker gripped in both hands. Then I nodded, set my bag down on the daybed, and placed Diane's photograph on the shelf, between a can of eggshell white paint and a box of dryer sheets. "It's fine," I said. "This is fine." Curtis looked relieved in a way that told me he'd braced for pushback. "Great. Dinner's around 6:30. Renee's making something." That first night I lay on that daybed staring at the ceiling, my new knee throbbing in time with my pulse, and I thought about how fast Renee had said yes on the phone. No hesitation, no let me talk to Curtis, no give me a day, just yes. At the time that had felt like love. Lying there in the buzzing dark of that mudroom with the cold seeping up through the concrete, I started to wonder if it had been something else entirely. They tell you to keep moving after knee replacement surgery. Gentle exercises, short, careful walks, nothing strenuous, and to keep the leg elevated whenever you're sitting for any real length of time. I followed the instructions as best I could that first week, hobbling on the walker down that narrow hallway to the bathroom, gritting my teeth through the physical therapy stretches Dr. Whitfield's office had printed out for me. On the third day, Renee came into the mudroom around 7 in the morning while I was struggling to get my compression sock on over the swelling and set a laundry basket down on the floor just inside the door. It landed with a heavy thud against the concrete. "Since you're up," she said, "you mind starting a load? I'm swamped this morning, and Curtis needs his work shirts." I looked at that basket, my hands still working the compression sock over a knee that felt like it had a hot coal buried inside it. "Renee, I can barely stand up on my own right now. I'm 2 days out of a hospital bed." She crossed her arms, tilted her head the way she did when she thought you were being dramatic. "Dad, it's just sorting and pushing buttons. You're not lifting anything heavy." I braced myself against the wall, got upright, and I loaded that basket into the machine by leaning most of my weight on the washer's edge, my new knee screaming with every shift of balance. I had to stop twice, once to breathe through a wave of dizziness, Once because the pain crested so hard I had to press my forehead against the cool metal top of the dryer and wait it out. I got the load started. Then I made it back to the daybed and sat there with my hands shaking, not from nerves, from the deep bone-level exhaustion of a body that had been pushed further than it had left to give. I thought about Diane then. Not for comfort exactly, more like a conversation I needed to have. She had me doing laundry, I told her, inside my head, because that's where most of my conversations with Diane lived these days. 2 days after knee surgery. She'd have had something to say about that. Something with a good deal more steel in it than I was currently managing. By the second week, I'd developed what I can only call survival habits. I woke early, before 6, partly because that mudroom had no real window to block the hallway light bleeding under the door, and partly because I'd learned the earlier I was up, the better my odds of getting through the kitchen before Renee staked her claim on it for the morning. Those quiet 20 minutes with my coffee before the house woke up were the best part of most days. Pathetic as that might sound, it was the truth. That second Monday, I decided to make breakfast for everybody, the way I used to on Saturdays when Renee was small, back before Diane got sick, back before any of us knew what was coming. It wasn't a grand gesture. I just wanted to give something back. Something warm. Something that said I wasn't only taking up space in that house. I got the eggs from the fridge, found the bread, and my hands, still not fully steady from the pain medication, fumbled the butter wrapper. I had to press my palm flat on the counter and breathe through it for a second. I cracked 4 eggs into the pan. The heat crept up faster than I meant it to because my hands were slow on the dial, and one side of the eggs went dark and crisp at the edges before I could pull them back. I was still working on it when Renee walked in at 7 sharp, dressed for the gym she never actually went to, coffee mug already in hand. She stopped when she saw me at the stove. "What is this?" she asked. "Breakfast," I said, keeping my voice even. Thought I'd make everyone something. I know the eggs got a little dark on one side, I can. She set her mug down on the counter with a sharp click and looked into the pan like she was inspecting a crime scene. "This whole side is burned, Dad. It's 1 egg. The others are fine." "Do you know what I don't have time for this morning?" she said, cutting straight across me, her voice dropping into that flat razor-edge tone she used when she wasn't bothering to hide what she actually thought. "I don't have time to come down here and clean up after somebody." My jaw tightened. I kept my eyes on the pan. I was trying to help. Help. She said it like it tasted bad. 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 Then she looked at me dead in the face, calm as reading a grocery list. "You're recovering from surgery in our house for free, Dad. Maybe just let us handle the kitchen." The words hit me somewhere in the sternum, not like a punch, more like slow pressure building towards something that either bends or breaks. "I'm not staying here for free," I said, and I was proud of how level my voice came out. "I'm your father. I raised you in that kitchen on Larkwood Avenue. I'm here because I had surgery, and I've been trying to stay out of everyone's way." "We'll try harder," she said, and picked her coffee back up. Right then, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Curtis came down in his work clothes, pressed khakis, a blue button-down, and stopped in the doorway when he registered the temperature in the room. I watched recognition cross his face. He knew exactly what he'd walked into. I looked at him. I held his gaze. I needed him to say something. Anything. Even just, "Let's all take a breath." Curtis picked his keys up off the counter, glanced at Renee, then back at me, and his face went carefully, deliberately blank, like a shutter coming down. "Gonna grab something on the way in," he said. "Save me some toast if there's extra." He walked out the front door. The sound of it closing hit me harder than anything Renee had said. I stood there at that stove with a spatula in my hand and a plate of eggs I'd gotten up early to make, and my chest ached with something that had nothing to do with my knee. I put the eggs on a plate, sat down alone at the kitchen table, and ate every bite because I was 66 years old, with a new knee that needed protein to heal, and because I wasn't about to waste food I'd made with my own 2 unsteady hands. I washed my own dishes, wiped the stove down, so the kitchen looked untouched. Later that afternoon, reaching for cash to tip the pharmacy delivery driver, I found my wallet $40 short of what I remembered having. I told myself I'd miscounted. I've never been a man who loses track of money. 40 years running a construction crew, you learn fast that carelessness costs somebody. A miscounted materials order means a job stalls for a week. I kept a small ledger, the way my own father had taught me, tallying every dollar every Sunday night without fail for going on 35 years. So that evening I sat on the edge of that daybed and counted every bill in my wallet 3 times, flat across my knee under that buzzing overhead bulb. Not $40 gone. 90. I'd counted 160 on Sunday. I was holding 70 now. I sat with that number a long time, turning it over the way you turn a cracked part in your hands looking for where the fracture started. I found Renee in the living room that evening, laptop open, a glass of wine sweating on the coaster beside her. Renee, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate a straight answer. I'm missing $90 out of my wallet. I counted it Sunday morning. She blinked, then tilted her head with that particular expression that managed both sympathy and condescension at once. Dad, are you sure? Because the anesthesia can mess with your memory for a while after surgery. Aunt Cheryl had her hip done, and she swore up and down. Someone stole her earrings for a week. It was fog, Dad. Just fog. I don't have surgery fog, I said carefully. I have a ledger and 35 years of keeping track of every dollar I've earned. $90 is missing. That's a fact, not a feeling. She sighed the sigh of a woman performing patience. Okay, Dad, I hear you. But nobody in this house took your money. Maybe it fell out of your pocket at the pharmacy. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of that daybed a long while, staring at the shelf where Diane's photograph stood between the paint can and the dryer sheets. Then I opened the drawer of the little nightstand Curtis had found for me, the one I'd been using to keep my medication schedule, and I pulled out a spiral notebook I'd bought at the Walgreens down the road the week before. I'd meant it only for tracking my pills. I opened to the first blank page and wrote the date. $90 missing from wallet. Confirmed by Sunday count. R denied. Blamed anesthesia. I told myself I might be overreacting. I gave it a few days. 3 days later, I came back from a follow-up appointment and reached for cab fare and came up $200 short in the main fold of that same wallet. My throat closed up, not from grief, from something harder than grief. The specific ache of having your worst suspicion confirmed. I sat on the edge of the daybed with my hand pressed flat over my sternum, and I opened the notebook and wrote a second entry underneath the first. What I didn't know yet, sitting there with my chest still aching, was that the money was only the beginning, that there were other things in that house being quietly taken from me that I hadn't even started watching for. Dr. Whitfield had given me a printed sheet at my second follow-up, dietary guidelines meant to support healing and keep inflammation down after a joint replacement, plenty of protein, plenty of water, nothing heavily processed or fried while my body was doing the hard work of knitting bone and tissue back together. I'd left a copy of it on the refrigerator door under a magnet shaped like a little wooden fish, a souvenir Diane and I had picked up on a trip to the coast years back, the one keepsake I'd brought with me besides her photograph. 3 weeks into my stay, Renee set a plate in front of me at dinner, a slab of something fried the night before and reheated in oil that had gone cloudy, a scoop of instant mashed potatoes, canned peas gone soft and gray. Curtis and Renee had grilled chicken and a fresh salad. I looked at my plate, looked at theirs, picked up my fork, and set it back down. Renee, I appreciate you cooking. I do, but the surgeon's got me on a specific diet right now, especially with the swelling. She looked up with an expression landing somewhere between pity and irritation. Dad, I cook one dinner. I don't have time to make 2 separate meals every night. I'm not asking for anything fancy. Even just a plain piece of chicken. Some rice. My mother had knee surgery and ate whatever was put in front of her, she said, cutting me off with a bright, brittle smile. Half these restrictions are overblown. Something sharp moved through my chest. Not quite anger, not quite despair. The sheet's right there on your fridge, Renee. It's not overblown. It's from the surgeon. Curtis set his fork down. I looked at him, felt my heart lift just slightly, the way it always did in those moments when I still believed, foolishly, that he might step in on my behalf. Renee's been working all day, Harold, he said, using my actual name for once, which somehow made it worse. Maybe just eat what's there. If it bothers you, mention it to the doctor next visit. I ate 3 bites. The oil hit my stomach hard, and by the second bite I could feel the nausea rising, that slow warning I'd already come to recognize as the start of a bad hour. I excused myself before dessert, said my stomach was bothering me, which was entirely true, and went back to the mudroom. I found the sleeve of plain crackers I'd bought and hidden in that nightstand drawer for exactly this kind of evening, and I ate a few, and I looked at Diane's photograph. They left the sheet right there on the fridge, I told her, under the fish magnet, the one from Rockaway Beach. Remember that trip? My voice cracked, just slightly, just enough that I had to press my lips together and wait a moment before I could go on. I keep telling myself it's thoughtlessness, but a person who isn't thinking still sees a piece of paper on the refrigerator every single morning. I opened the notebook and wrote a third entry. The following morning, I discovered my truck wasn't in the driveway. I'd been driving myself to my follow-up appointments since the second week, refusing rides even when offered, because as long as I drove myself, I could tell myself it was my choice, an old man's stubbornness, nothing more. That Thursday morning, the space where my Silverado had been sitting since I arrived was simply empty. I knocked on Curtis and Renee's bedroom door. Curtis answered, squinting, hair rumpled. "My truck's gone," I said. "I've got a follow-up at 9. "Oh yeah, Renee took it," he said. "Her car's in the shop. I thought I mentioned it." He had not mentioned it. "That's my truck, Curtis. Nobody asked me." I know, he said, with that breezy helplessness of a man handing someone a Band-Aid for a broken bone. "She'll have it back by noon. Just call a rideshare. I'll cover it." I called a car. I sat on the front step in the cool morning air waiting for it, my folder of discharge paperwork pressed against my chest, and told myself the sting in my eyes was just the wind. The driver, an older man, glanced at me twice in the mirror and finally asked if I was doing all right. "Long morning," I told him, and he nodded and left it at that. I appreciated him more than I could have said. That afternoon, my truck sat back in the driveway, and Renee came through the front door with shopping bags from a boutique downtown, hair freshly styled, a receipt sitting on the kitchen counter that I didn't mean to read but read anyway. Salon, $68, charged at 9:40 that morning, half an hour after my appointment had started. That night, I sat on the daybed with my phone and opened the banking app I hadn't checked in nearly 2 weeks. Some part of me had already known what I'd find and had been delaying the moment of knowing for as long as I possibly could. I'd set aside $11,000 in a separate account specifically to cover the parts of my surgery and recovery insurance wouldn't touch: physical therapy, co-pays, medication, the home health aide I'd planned to hire once I got back to Larkwood Avenue. I'd mentioned that account to Renee once, in the first week, just enough to reassure her I wouldn't be a financial burden. What I hadn't done was change the PIN on the debit card linked to it, an old card Curtis had used years back to help me withdraw cash while I was laid up with a torn rotator cuff. I'd told him the number then and never thought to change it, because it had never once crossed my mind that I needed protecting from my own son-in-law. The balance read $4,100. Nearly $7,000 gone in withdrawals over 3 weeks, all pulled from ATMs within 2 miles of Curtis's office, all during business hours on weekdays when I was either at appointments or in that mudroom. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I waited until Curtis was dressed for work, sitting on the edge of the bed scrolling his phone, and I knocked and asked for 5 minutes. I set my phone on the desk between us, the banking app open. He looked at the screen. A muscle worked in his jaw. "Harold, I can explain." "How much is left?" I said. He exhaled hard. "I got into some debt with a business thing that went sideways. I was going to put it back before you noticed, I swear to God. That money is for my recovery, Curtis, not a business fund. Without it, I start missing physical therapy sessions. I start skipping medication. Do you understand what that means for a man my age, with a brand new knee?" His face had gone a color I'd never seen on him. "I know," he said. "I know. I'll pay every cent back. You have until the end of the month," I told him. "Every dollar." I walked out and pressed my back against the hallway wall and let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly 10 seconds. Then I straightened up and went to make my coffee. Before I tell you what happened after that, drop a still here in the comments, because what's coming next is the kind of thing most families never see until it's far too late, and I don't want you missing a single word of it. A quick note before we continue. Parts of this story are fictionalized around a real emotional truth. If that's not what you came for tonight, this is your moment to step away gently, no hard feelings. But if you're staying, hold on. Something shifted in Renee that Saturday, and it took me until noon to understand why. She was warm, unprompted, the kind of warm that actually reached her eyes. She poured my coffee without being asked if I'd slept all right. In 3 weeks under that roof, she had never once done either of those things. Then Curtis mentioned that his parents, Bill and Sandra, were driving up from Wichita that afternoon, and everything clicked into place. Bill and Sandra arrived at 2 with a pie and a bottle of wine, and the house filled with warmth that had been entirely absent since I'd moved in. Bill shook my hand with both of his. "Harold, good to see you. How are you holding up?" Genuine concern, plain on his face, and my throat tightened. Sandra squeezed my forearm and told me I had good people around me. Right on cue, Renee appeared at my elbow with a fresh cup of tea she hadn't made me once in 3 weeks. "We just want Dad comfortable," she said, looking at Curtis with a smile warm enough to melt frost off a windshield. "Isn't that right, babe?" "Absolutely," Curtis said. "Whatever he needs." I wrapped both hands around that teacup so nobody would see my knuckles go white. Over the next 2 hours, I watched Renee give the performance of her life, describing how she'd rearranged her whole schedule to help me, the special meals she'd prepared for my recovery, while I thought of the reheated pork and the fish magnet still pinned uselessly to the fridge, and I kept my face perfectly neutral. "You're lucky," Sandra told me, patting my hand. "And I'll. Not every daughter would do this for her father. And I'll. And I'll. And I'll. I'm very grateful," I said. My voice didn't crack. I was proud of that. After Bill and Sandra left, the house went quiet in the way it always does once the performance ends. Renee kicked off her shoes. Curtis loosened his collar. Both of them settled back into their real shapes, the ones I actually lived with. "You were quiet today," Renee said, almost amused. "I'm always quiet," I said. That night I lay awake a long time turning one thought over. The most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in enough truth that good people can't tell the difference. Bill and Sandra were good people. They had no idea what they'd just watched. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, I woke from a post-therapy nap and lay still in the gray light, meter his, and I heard Renee's voice coming through the thin wall between the mudroom and the living room with unusual clarity. She wasn't shouting. She was speaking fast and low, the way people talk when they think no one's listening. "He's already here, already dependent on us for basically everything. The next step is Larkwood. Once it sells, we clear the second mortgage and we're actually ahead for once." A pause. Someone on the other end. "I know what he said. But think about it. He's 66. He's got a bad heart on top of the knee thing. Realistically, how many years are we talking? It sits there. It goes through probate. We get scraps after the lawyers take their cut. Why not now, while we can actually use it?" My hand found the wall. I pressed my palm flat against the cold drywall like I was checking for a pulse. "Curtis is working on it," she said. "He just needs to find the moment. Dad trusts him. That's the whole advantage. We just need the signature. Once he signs, everything else takes care of itself." I sat there a long time with my hand against that wall, my heart doing something loud and complicated in my chest. Then I got up, walked to the shelf, and picked up Diane's photograph. "I see it now," I told her. The whole thing. I opened the notebook, read back through every entry, the money, the food, the truck, the account, and then I turned to a fresh page. This time, I didn't write down what had been done to me. I started writing what I was going to do about it. Monday morning, before anyone else was awake, I made 2 calls. The first was to my bank's fraud department, explaining that an old authorized user had retained access to an account he had no current right to use. The woman on the line walked me through freezing the account and filing a formal dispute, and confirmed that what I was describing met Oklahoma's statutory definition of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The second call took longer to make, not because I didn't have the number. I'd written it in the front cover of the notebook 2 weeks earlier, but because dialing it meant accepting the situation had crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. Diane Okafor was an elder law attorney in Tulsa, recommended by a man I used to run crews with, whose own mother had gone through something similar. She asked precise questions, dates, amounts, exact words spoken. She asked if I had anything in writing. "I've got a notebook," I told her. 41 entries over 3 weeks. "That's very good, Harold," she said. "Photograph every page and send them to my office today." I bought a small sliding lock at the hardware store that afternoon. Told Curtis it was because the pain medication sometimes left me disoriented and I wanted to feel secure, which was true enough. I photographed every page and sent them, along with the bank's fraud confirmation and a picture of that fish magnet still holding up a dietary sheet nobody had followed in weeks. I stopped apologizing for existing after that. I stopped speaking quietly. Stopped retreating to that mudroom the second I finished eating. I made myself a real lunch and sat at the kitchen table in the good chair by the window, and when Curtis came through mid-afternoon and stopped short at the sight of me sitting there like I belonged, something shifted in his face. "You good, Harold?" he asked. "Careful." "Better than I've been in a while," I said. "Thank you for asking." He stood there a moment, then said, "I seem different." asked how the knee was doing. Numbers are good, I told him, and he nodded and left the room, and a minute later I heard him in the hallway dialing his phone in that low, urgent register of a man trying not to be overheard. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what he was telling her. 10 days before Thanksgiving, Renee left for her book club at 6:15, and for the first time in over a month it was just Curtis and me in that living room, no performance to keep up. I came out and asked if I could sit, and he waved me toward the good armchair, the one I'd quietly claimed as mine over the last couple weeks. I want to talk, I said. Just us. The way we used to. I reminded him of a winter years back, right after Diane and I first started dating him, when his own father had been laid off for 4 months and Curtis had picked up a paper route before school without ever once complaining. I told him I'd always admired that about him, that I didn't think I'd ever said so directly. Something genuine moved through his face. Not guilt, not calculation, just the unguarded warmth of a man remembering something that had actually mattered to him. Then, I told him what I'd found in the account, watched the color drain out of his face while he listened. I was going to put it back, he said, voice rough. I panicked. Harold. The business thing spiraled and I thought I could fix it before anybody had to know. But you noticed? I said. I noticed. I agreed. What I gave you and Renee over the years, I gave freely, because that's what family does when they have something to give. But what you took, that's not the same thing. Giving and taking are never the same thing. His eyes went red-rimmed. How is it so wrong for me to need help? It isn't wrong to need help, I said. It's wrong to take it without asking. It's wrong to take it from a man's recovery fund and hope he's too sick or too tired to notice. I stood, my new knee protesting the movement. I would have given it to you, Curtis, if you'd come to me and said you were drowning. I would have. That's who I am. God. But love doesn't mean I'll let you do this to me. I walked back down the hall. Behind me I heard him take a long, unsteady breath, and then dial his phone. I already knew who he was calling, and that suited me fine, because my attorney had told me exactly what I needed next was Curtis acknowledging it all out loud, and now I had it. 2 days later I discovered Renee wearing my old work jacket, showing it off on a video call to a friend, some line about it being very rugged chic right now. That jacket had been the last thing Diane bought me before she got sick, a heavy canvas coat she'd wrapped and put under the tree the Christmas before her diagnosis. I'd worn it every winter for 7 years. Must. Give it to me, please, I said, standing in the doorway. My voice came out flat and quiet. She tilted her head. I was just showing Katie the fabric. Dad, don't make it into a whole thing. It's just a jacket, I said pleasantly, which is exactly why it should be easy to remember that my things are mine, and you ask, before touching them. Her eyes narrowed, and something in her decided to drop the pretense entirely. You know, most people staying somewhere for free have a little more flexibility about stuff like this. I'm not staying for free, I said. I'm your father. And even if I were a stranger paying rent, the answer would be the same. You ask. Curtis appeared in the doorway right then, took in the scene, and I turned to him directly. I'm 66 years old. I just had major surgery, and in spite of everything, I've worked very hard not to be a burden in this house. But not being a burden doesn't mean I have no rights. It doesn't mean my things are available to anyone who wants them without asking. Renee made a sharp exhale and stalked off toward the kitchen. Curtis stood frozen in the doorway, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen there in weeks. Something raw, something that looked like fear, not of me, but of whatever was coming. I put the jacket back on over my sweater, buttoned it slow, and walked past him toward the kitchen. The following Sunday, Renee cooked a real meal, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, exactly what the dietary sheet had called for from the very first week. I looked up some recipes that would be good for your recovery, she said, settling into her chair with a warm smile she usually saved for company. The sheet had been on that refrigerator for 6 weeks. Thank you, Renee, I said. This looks wonderful. And it did. I ate it slowly. The way a man eats, who understands a good meal, can be a transaction, and who has decided that accepting the meal doesn't mean accepting whatever terms come next. After Curtis cleared the plates, he sat back down instead of drifting to the television, and Renee refilled her water and stayed seated too. A prepared kind of stillness settled over that table. Dad, Curtis said, we wanted to talk about your future, about what makes the most sense going forward. Dad. Ed. Dead. 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 All right, I said. Renee leaned in, hands folded, voice carrying the practiced warmth of a woman who'd rehearsed this. We've been thinking about the Larkwood house. You're here now, focused on recovery, and it's just sitting there empty all winter, nobody keeping an eye on it, with everything you're dealing with. She tilted her head. It might make more sense to sell. Use the equity for your recovery costs. Put some aside for the future, and you wouldn't have to worry about a property you can't look after right now. I looked at her, then at Curtis, watching me with the careful expression of a man hoping his rehearsed line would land. I thought about the hydrangeas along the side fence, the kitchen where I'd made 30 years of Saturday breakfasts, the bedroom where Diane had taken her last breath on a quiet Tuesday morning. That's something to think about, I said. Market's strong right now, Curtis pushed. Places in that neighborhood move fast. Let me think about it, I said again, exactly the same tone. A beat of silence. Renee's smile held, but her eyes recalculated. Of course, take your time. We just want what's best for you. I know you do, I said pleasantly, and stood, thanked her again for dinner, and walked back to the mudroom, with my back straight. I, see, I, 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 I. Behind me I heard the low, urgent murmur of two people beginning to debrief. I closed my door, and sat on the edge of the daybed, and felt something settle in my chest that wasn't relief exactly, but was close to it, and they were scared now. And a frightened person who feels cornered will always reach for the most extreme option they've got. All I had to do was wait. They didn't wait long. By Monday, the Wi-Fi password had changed without explanation. By Tuesday dinner, Renee set only 2 plates on the table. Figured you'd want to manage your own meals since you're so particular, she said, not looking up. There was stuff in the fridge, she added. 2 eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a container of soup I'd made myself days earlier. Wednesday evening, sitting in the armchair with a book, Renee came in from the kitchen with her performance stripped entirely away. We need to talk about a timeline, Dad. You've been here almost 7 weeks. This was only supposed to be temporary. I'm still finishing physical therapy, I said. This is our house, she said. Flat now. No warmth left in it at all. We get to decide who stays, and for how long. And honestly, 7 weeks is long enough. I looked at Curtis, standing in the doorway, arms loose at his sides. He held my gaze, exactly 2 seconds before his eyes slid to the window behind me. He did not move toward me. He did not open his mouth. That, more than anything Renee had said, was the thing that cracked something open in my chest. I understand, I said, and walked to my room and called my attorney. Diane, I said, I'm ready. When can we move? Whenever you say, she said. Before Thanksgiving, I told her, looking out the narrow slat of frosted glass at a sky the color of pewter, heavy, with the promise of the season's first real, cold snap. Note, I woke at 5 the morning I was set to leave, no alarm needed, the way you wake naturally when something important is waiting on the other side of the day. I dressed slowly, the good trousers, Diane's jacket, packed my duffel in under 30 minutes, everything fitting into the same bag I'd arrived with. I wrapped her photograph in a soft cloth and set it on top. I called my attorney at 7:30. Everything was filed, the fraud report certified, the ATM records time-stamped against Curtis's known work schedule. Airtight, she told me. And the guardianship inquiry Renee had started making calls about, the one I'd overheard her asking a different attorney about 2 days prior, the possibility of having me declared incapacitated so she could manage my accounts without my consent. That call had backfired entirely. I have full legal capacity, Diane Okafor told me, and I'm managing my own affairs with documentation to prove it. Any attempt like that becomes evidence of intent, not a solution. I called my oldest friend, Ray Paletti, still living 2 streets over from Larkwood Avenue after all these years. You headed home? He asked, warm and immediate. Tea. Today, I said. Guest room still open if I need a few nights while I get the house sorted? Been made up since you called last week, he said. Stay as long as you need. I came out around 2 that afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with coffee I'd made myself. Curtis passed through on his way to the living room, slowed when he saw me, something shifting across his face. The hesitation of a man standing at a door he knows he should open but can't quite make himself reach for. He opened his mouth. Then Renee called his name from the other room and the moment dissolved, and he walked away. 20 minutes later I heard her voice from down the hall, low and urgent. I'm calling about a family matter, she was saying. My father is recovering from surgery, and we have some concerns about his ability to manage his own affairs. I wanted to understand the process for guardianship in Oklahoma, if the person is unwilling. I set my coffee mug down on the table. The small, firm sound of ceramic against wood felt final, like the period at the end of a long sentence. I stood up, walked down the hall, and knocked twice on the living room door. Renee, Curtis, I need to speak with you both this evening. It's important. That evening, I found them in the living room, coffee cups in hand, and I asked them both to sit. I remained standing, took the notebook from my jacket pocket, and set it on the table between us, along with my phone open to the transaction history, the ATM locations highlighted. I want to tell you what I know, I said, and I need you not to interrupt until I'm finished. Can you do that? I laid it all out, plainly, without raising my voice. The missing cash, the withdrawals, the fraud report filed with the bank, the phone call I'd overheard about selling Larkwood Avenue once I'd signed, the second call I'd overheard that very afternoon about guardianship. Renee's face went the color of someone realizing the wall in front of her is made of glass and she's already walked through it. That's not, Dad. That is completely. I asked you not to interrupt, I said, and my voice didn't need to rise to carry the weight of it. Curtis stood so fast his mug tilted on the cushion beside him. Dad, sit down, son, I said, my voice cracking, not from weakness but from the sheer weight of saying it to a man who'd stood beside his wife and said nothing while she told me my time in their home was up. He sat back down. I'm not here to destroy either of you, I told them. I'm here to tell you the truth, and then I'm going home. I looked at Curtis, really looked at him. You didn't hurt me with one mistake I could forgive and move past. You made a choice, every single day, for 7 weeks, not to protect me. Every time she spoke to me like I was inconvenient furniture, you were close enough to hear it, and you chose the wall behind my shoulder instead. That is what I'll carry out of this house. Not the money, not the room. The fact that you were 10 feet away every day, and chose not to see me. His face crumpled. A sound came out of him, raw and young, nothing like words at all. Dad, I know, I said, and I meant it. Renee stood, robe pulled tight, jaw set hard. This is ridiculous. You're a sick old man who's been living here for free, and now you're threatening us. You called a lawyer today to ask how to take my house while I'm still alive to say no, I said quietly. I don't think either of us should be talking about who has room to call things ridiculous. I picked up the notebook and my phone from the table. I looked at Curtis one last time, and part of me wanted to cross that room and put a hand on his shoulder the way I used to when Renee brought him around as a scared kid, asking for my blessing. I didn't. Some lessons only take root if you carry them alone. I'm leaving, I said. My attorney has everything she needs. The bank will be in touch. I hope, someday, you both find your way back to being the people I thought you were. I loaded my bags into the truck, keys already in my jacket pocket where I'd moved them 2 weeks before. The drive to Larkwood Avenue took 40 minutes on clear roads. I parked out front and sat there a long moment looking at the house, the hydrangeas gone dormant along the fence, wrapped in burlap the way I'd left them back in September. I got out, walked up, and pressed my palm gently against the nearest bundle of burlap. I'm home, I said, and the quiet street swallowed the sound whole. That night, sitting in Diane's kitchen with her photograph in my hands, I thought about everything I might have done differently. I should have asked harder questions in September. I should have trusted the hesitation in Renee's voice on that first call. I should have remembered what Diane always used to tell me. Harold, love doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. If you're watching this and you have a parent who's aging, who's sick, who's quietly shrinking themselves to take up less space in your life, please see them. Not their savings account. Not the house they're sitting on. Them. This isn't really a story about revenge. It never is. It's about a man who needed to be seen by the people who were supposed to love him first. I don't know if Curtis or Renee will ever find their way back to who I thought they were. I hope they do. The door on Larkwood Avenue was never locked to them, and it never will be. That's the difference between a father and whatever it is a person becomes when fear gets a hold of them. I still choose love, even now. My only advice: don't wait for someone to hand you a laundry basket after surgery to understand what you're worth. You don't have to earn your place in your own life. If this story moves something in you tonight, drop a comment and tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in family justice the way I do, Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know.